The escape of the galley slaves. In the year 1563 the Three Half Moons, with 30 men on board, set sail from Portsmouth for the south of Spain, intending to sell their goods to merchants in the town of Seville, situated on the river Guadalquivir. The wind was behind them and they had a prosperous voyage till they neared the Straits of Gibraltar, when 8 Turkish ships suddenly hove in sight, and surrounded the Three Half Moons. Of course, no vessel ever entered the Mediterranean, which in those days was alive with pirates, without being fully armed, and every man was a fighter. So when the captain of the Three Half Moons beheld the flag with the crescent flying at the masthead of each galley, he ordered the trumpets and drums to be beaten, and served out swords and ammunition to the crew. This done, John Fox the gunner moved his cannon into position and sent a shower of bullets at the Turks. The enemy however either had better artillery or were in greater practice than the English men, for they loaded at least 3 times as quickly, coming up as they did so to closed quarters, so that the crew were forced to take to their bows. Their aim was deadly and soon many of the Turks had fallen upon their decks, but again their more rapid firing told, and soon there were signs that the Three Half Moons was filling with water from the holes pierced in her side. Then the Turks left their own galleys and tried to board her before she sank. Bows and cannon were alike useless now, so the English seized their pikes and swords, and fought hand to hand till they were overborne by the number of the enemy. At length they could resist no longer. Their weapons were taken from them, and those who were left alive were sent, as prisoners of war usually were, to work at the oars of the galley. This was a fate dreaded by all from nearly the beginnings of history. The unfortunate slaves were generally chained together on benches in a stifling, dark place, where they could hardly breathe. Their food was scanty and often bad, and if from exhaustion any man showed symptoms of flagging, an overseer was at hand to flog him into greater vigor. Should the ship sink, as often happened, the heavy chains deprived the unhappy slaves of any chance of escaping death. It was the custom of the Turks to lay up their galleys during the winter in a harbour near the town of Alexandria, and to throw all the prisoners and galley slaves into jail, with irons on their legs. The crew of the Three Half Moons were thrust into dungeons like the rest, but before very long the captain and the owner of the ship, who had sailed with them, were ransomed by their friends. Thankful though they were to be free again, they suffered terrible pain at leaving their companions to so many in great miseries, and they could only falter out a few broken words about doing their best to collect money at home to deliver them also. The prisoners sighed and did not answer. They knew too well the worth of promises such as these. Their daily allowance of food in the prison was no greater than it had been on the galleys, and they were all more than half starved. Yet their plight would have been even worse than it was, had not John Fox the gunner possessed unusual skill as a barber, which somehow became known, and the officials about the jail and harbour would send for him to shave them and cut their hair. With the money thus earned, he bought good food for his mates and himself. After a while, he and certain of his companions were allowed by the keeper to go out for the day and make what they could, a regular part of their earnings being paid to the jailer. As they were obliged to report themselves at night and always kept the irons on their legs, there was not much fear of their running away. In the winter of 1577, when the crew of the Three Half Moons had reached the 14th year of their captivity, the galleys were dismantled of their masts and sails, and laid up in harbour till the spring. The captains and sailors, having nothing more to do, returned to their own homes. And the prisoners, amounting in all to 268 Christians belonging to 16 different nations, were marched back to the prison. Not far from the harbour was an eating house kept by one Unticaro, a Spaniard, who since he had been 30 years a captive without once attempting to escape was permitted certain privileges. With him, John Fox had long ago made friends, and it was of this man he now asked advice as to his best plan of running away, because Fox had determined that, even if he died for it, he would stay there no longer. Unticaro had lacked the courage to move on his own account, but fired by Fox, readily agreed to risk his own life also. 6 of the other prisoners whom they could trust were let into the secret, and they swore they would stand or fall together. The first thing to be done was, of course, to get rid of their chains, so Fox distributed files among them, with orders to have their irons off their legs by 8 o'clock the next night. They had by this time been imprisoned for so many years, and the jailer had got so accustomed to seeing them about, that so long as they were all there when he locked up, he did not trouble himself further. On the evening of the following day, January 1, 1578, the 6 captives accompanied by John Fox met at Unticaro's eating house, pretending to be in high spirits so that nobody who dropped in should guess that anything serious was on hand. When 8 o'clock struck, Fox sent Unticaro to the master of the harbour, with a message professing to come from one of the city officials, a friend of the jailers. Unticaro seems to have persuaded the jailer to go with him, and the two set out, injunctions being given to the warders not to bar the gate till his return, as he should not be absent long. No sooner had they departed, than the other men began to search Unticaro's house for the various weapons which he had hidden there. These all proved to be old, and there was only one sword among them which Fox took, and, grasping the hilt, he concealed himself round the corner of the house and awaited the jailer. The man was not long in coming, and when he saw the house in total darkness he instantly suspected that something was the matter. Stepping back from the door in order to make sure that he might not be taken by surprise, he perceived Fox standing in the shadow, and cried, "O Fox, what have I deserved of thee that thou shouldst seek my death?" "Thou villain," answered Fox, "thou hast sucked many a Christian's blood, and now thou shalt know what thou hast deserved at my hands," and he lifted his sword and struck the keeper such a blow that he fell stark dead to the ground. Leaving the body, the men went down to the place where the 6 warders were waiting. "Who goes there?" asked one, and Fox replied, "All friends," which, says the chronicler, when they were in, proved contrary, for the prisoners fell upon the jailers and soon dispatched them all. Then Fox barred the gate and dragged a gun against it, for he had work to do inside. In the jailer's lodge, which appears to have been empty, they found the prison keys and a number of weapons much better than those they had brought with them. There was also a chest containing money which they would certainly need, if they managed to escape from the town. John Fox, however, declined to touch any of it, but Unticaro and 2 others were not so scrupulous, and stuffed as many golden ducats into their clothes as they could contrive to stow away. After this was done, Fox bade them follow him into the prison, unlocking the doors with the jailer's keys, and slaying the warders in charge. The prisoners, thus set free, were put by him to different tasks, the greater number being ordered to seize a galley lying at the prison end of the harbour, while the others carried down to it the mast and the sails and oars which had been stored up in the prison. Although most of the warders had been killed, 8 of them had taken refuge in the roof of the prison, and in order to come at them the conspirators had to place ladders against the walls. The fighting was hot, and Fox received 3 shots in his clothes, while Unticaro and the 2 men who had taken the ducats were killed outright, which Fox considered a judgment upon them, for taking what did not belong to them. All seemed going well, when a wounded Turk fell outside the prison wall, and made such a lowing or bellowing, that he was heard by the people who lived in 1 or 2 scattered houses about. They instantly gave the alarm, and the prisoners fighting for their freedom felt as if the way of escape was barred to them. For at each end of the harbour was a fortress, while the city of Alexandria lay behind. Yet, such good use had the men made of the start they had had in getting ready the galley that before another ship could put to sea they were all on board, and had passed in safety the guns of the 2 forts, gaining the open water. Once fairly away, they looked back to be sure that none of the Turkish vessels were likely to catch them up. The shores of the harbour were black with people, in companies like unto swarms of bees, bustling themselves to dress up the galleys. But this was not so easy, as the whole of the fittings were locked up in the town. So the Christians breathed again, and, falling on their knees, gave thanks for their deliverance. But the danger was by no means over, the wind was constantly shifting, and they did not know how to shape their course. And worse than that, the few provisions, which in their haste they had been able to bring, were soon exhausted. In 28 days, 8 persons died of starvation, just before they made the port of Gallipoli in the island of Candia. Here they were welcomed by the abbot and the monks, who bade them stay till they were strong again, and thankful the fugitives were for their rest. After a while they took ship, and reached the harbour of Taranto in South Italy without further adventure, and there by order of Fox the galley was sold and the price divided equally among the men. Together they marched to Naples where they parted, every man going to his own country, Fox himself journeying to Rome. The Pope granted him a private interview, and bestowed a large sum of money on him, while the King of Spain pensioned him on 20 pence a day, which in those times meant a great deal more than it does now. The ministers of Queen Elizabeth were not behind the rest, and, when Fox returned to England in 1579, extended to him their liberality to maintain him in his age, to the great encouragement of all Christians.